Mr. Chairman, we're live.
Okay, very good. Let's call ourselves back to order. Is Mr. Krieger? I see his name on there. Okay, you're next on the agenda, representing Wyoming Business Council.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Furphy. I'll share my screen here and get started. This is a pretty in-depth look across what we've been doing last year and what we're looking forward to. So I'll try and break it and sectionalize this for questions as we move ahead. All right. You guys see all that? Okay.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to hit on CARES Act of last year's accomplishments of CARES Act in 2020. As Wyoming does continue to lead, and 2021 broadband by the numbers. We ended up deploying $52,847,058 in broadband infrastructure, excuse me, with over 12,000 homes passed. The total on that project ended up being minimum was 100 over 10. With 5,434 with fiber service with up to or more than 1 gig for the total of 12,000. Fiber optic cable, 554.4 total route miles were installed. That was both middle mile and last mile to the home. New wireless towers, 66 new wireless towers were put up across the state. 5 of them were mixed use, those were particular to the Park County area. Interesting fact of the wireless towers, a significant number of those were off-grid. So they're completely solar and wind powered, and they're now being moved to being a mixed use grid tie versus grid free. So anyway, moving on, we had a huge issues, COVID outbreaks. I don't think there was any contractors or any construction crews that were immune to having shutdowns to COVID-19 of itself. There were a few supply chain issues, not a large amount, and the availability of contractors. I mean, Wyoming pretty much took them, which was awesome because some of the other states were jealous that we had them. And then ultimately the work that was done by the time the contracts were let and everything was arranged and all the agreements were made was pretty much done in 90 days. So it's unprecedented for what's been done and moving forward. Now in the final reports, we asked for where they were, how things looked as far as the completion of the projects. Funding, of course, did end the end of December. But even with that, all of the providers that were involved agreed that after that date, they would complete the projects on their own dime. Most of the equipment was in place. It was just waiting for the labor to be put in. So that's a lot of that is being done on their own dime still as we speak. Most of it is being done. Most of what needed to be completed has been done in the first quarter and part of the second quarter of 21, again on the provider's own dime. And then at that point, they have until the end of the year to finish on their own dime what they proposed to complete. So we're monitoring that as we move forward, and we'll have more as that comes along. Finally, Connect Wyoming, what I'm calling the Connect Wyoming recovery. As anybody involved in this knew, this was a 90-day sprint. 60, 70-hour work weeks for everybody or plus, all kinds of stories of how everybody, what I say, saddled up and got the job done. It was a great thing to see, but definitely with the pressure being off, they've enjoyed a little bit of time to their own after being going so fast over that 90 days. So anyway, lead out to them in the CARES Act itself and Connect Wyoming, what we're calling 1.0 at this point, and how we came out last year. So great success for the state, our providers, and ultimately our citizens. So as we move forward, talking about CARES Act, we're moving into the Wyoming Broadband Map Initiative. Get a little bit of homage to this earlier. contract funding. Governor Gordon approved 200,000 of CARES Act monies for this initiative. And what that allows us to do is we can go out and purchase UCLA data. Anyone that goes to speedtest.net or knows that black background and the dial that comes around when they run a speed test. In fact, the Wyoming broadband map and the speed test associated with that behind the scenes is UCLA. So there's thousands of those tests ran in the state every day. Providers host the servers themselves. UCLA gathers the data and starts the analytic process there. They offer that available for sale back to the state. So what we're going to do is reach out and grab 1 year of historical as well as current data sets from UCLA and use that to populate our map. That we get 2 forms from that. We get the raw data itself, and we also get some pre-analyzed data as well. So we're not seeing, somebody that's too far from their router, or they're buying 3 meg connection when there's 100 meg connection available. Some of those analytics are already in place to identify those types of situations. Further, same thing with MLab. MLab is another speed test. It's an open source. And what it does, when you go to Google and specifically, and you type in speed test, it'll come up with a button to run a speed test now. That is operated on top of MLab. Similar to UCLA, it's just a different platform. Again, it's another data source that we can use to identify where we have issues. Then moving on to the state broadband map, we still have all the features and functionality of the state broadband map. You can go in, complete the survey, locate your house, and take a speed test, put in the data there that gives us the ability to analyze that. We have that data going all back to the beginning of the map itself, and then as well as a new push moving forward. You heard a little bit from Laurel and Ken of the Wyoming Department of Education on the K12 student connectivity survey. We started really collecting data spring of this year. We're running into a marketing plan for the fall. We'll get more into that later. And then provider data, the ultimate identification of where bandwidth isn't and it's not, is provider data. Each provider that participated in Connect Wyoming, part of the rules to that program was that they provided their data on where they were at 25.3 and where their network was. So why just set up a program? They can log in. Each provider has their own login to their own information. They can't see anyone else's, and they can update their data at any time. Right now, there's no rule in place saying as to exactly when they have to. We're just pretty much recommending that, hey, we're all here to do this. Just update it as you guys have big build outs and you start completing upgrades on your networks. Let us know, and that way we can use that to analyze what we have or what we don't. Then lastly, the additional data that's going to allow us to view in conjunction with everything else is the federal data layer set. It's all inclusive. It has all the grants. It has anything the feds have done all the way back, I believe, since 2000. And we can take all that data, if there's anything active, anything that wasn't, and analyze that data. And of course, where Wyoming has primarily been what we call fixed broadband, that's everything terrestrial based on the ground. We're not paying any mind to what's in the air. I mean, what's above, say, 14,000 feet. We're not going to pay any mind to that. So that allows us, and we'll have the capabilities to segregate that data out of what has been awarded federally, because over the years, there's been a significant amount of money placed into an extraterrestrial solution. We can also go in, and I believe there was some talk of this earlier on mapping different things through WYDOT, but this is called vertical asset data, statewide, community-wide, towers, buildings, etc. We can easily take that data set, fold it into the mapping as well, and make it navigable. So now we see the large overarching view of the initiative. Here's the plan. Here's the graphic of how that works out. So as I mentioned before, all this data sets there, what you see on the left-hand side, all will go into the map. And what will come out on the right is what we're aiming for. What I'd mentioned earlier is we're going to be able to analyze our capabilities down to the 300-foot level or the 100-meter level using geospatial technology. And it's just a fancy word for map, for ARC, the ARC GIS that we're using. And then not only can we do the speed, we can do the coverage areas, and then to the best point, we can go sub-census block. So by the fact we can go neighborhood if we want to, but we'd have that capability to have that visibility that far into the capabilities of broadband across the state. And this is the timeline. We're already beginning. The first part of June was to get contracts started. We've already identified the low-hanging fruit, the APIs, a lot of the stuff that YGIS is going to need to move forward. We're starting to develop our process and initial data sets at YGIS. We're developing a roadmap for the action stage that's coming next, and we're beginning to develop the marketing framework specifically for broadband mapping, because the largest fall down on state mapping efforts is getting the people to take the actual state speed test. And that takes a significant amount of marketing. And we're going to do that in conjunction with the K12 survey as well. So we'll take that overarching broadband mapping marketing framework to be pretty much all inclusive, not only with the mapping we need and have the citizens go take the test, but also with our students and districts from across the state. Then we're a little behind on this as the date, but reaching out to the providers to kind of look and see what we can do for mapping. We've talked high level already about kind of a heat map on what's available at 25/3, what's available at 100 over 20, the 900 over 35, kind of keeping in line with SF 76 and the state broadband grant program. And also working with the school districts on leveraging that K12 survey that we put out the beginning of this year. And then finally the testing. And what's really going to come down to it is the action phase. We've committed to July 15th to have a proof of concept to the governor's office. Basically all the initial development of this, being able to take it over there and present to the governor's office and his staff that, hey, this is what we can do. This is what we got put together. This is where we're headed. Make sure if we need to make any adjustments, we can. And then from that point, basically until September, probably latter part of September, we'll be working on the customization. There will be some custom development that will need to be made specifically for our state and our application. And then we'll deploy the public side of the map in September timeframe, which will be in line with looking forward to the ARP funding and programs as we go ahead. And then finally in December would be the mission, and that would be the mission of the broadband mapping. That'd be to maintain where we're at and start looking to the future as mapping becomes a little easier topic going ahead. So with that, because broadband mapping and the advisory committee are the same, I'll run in with them. The broadband advisory committee, through the work with Kim Porter and other staff at the Wyoming Business Council, they were starting to work back through getting a strategic plan moved together with goals. Definitely the advisory committee wants to be the leading advocate for broadband in our state. Help to identify all the funding options, partnerships, and opportunities to leverage state dollars as we move forward. And then finally, provide education on broadband and leverage it to its full potential. And the last goal is significant because there's been quite a little conversation here already about how to help our students, how to help our states, looking at the next generation and what some are reaching out to see what the next graduate looks like. That will play homage into that significantly. And then finally, a broadband enhancement plan review. This broadband enhancement plan was completed September 2018 with the founding legislation requirements. It hasn't been updated thus far. And with the changes of SF 76 brought, that obviously brings about changes in our plan as well. So what we're going to be doing is bringing the current rules, new opportunities, really kind of playing a hat tip towards broadband integration versus electrification, learning a lot from what has been done in the past and maybe how we can adjust it for today. Digital equity, as there's been significant discussion, driving technology forward. Technology is got a hotbed just south of us, especially south of Cheyenne, and it's looking to move. It already has in a couple of instances and continues to do so as we move forward. And so if we can make sure that the entirety of our state is set up for that opportunity instead of a few pockets, I think it's going to help mold the future for our state and our citizens as well. And finally, rural scalability. Business, whether it actually needs it or not, probably doesn't realize how much it uses broadband. Healthcare, always an issue. Resiliency. Again, broadband can provide resiliency for communities as a whole. And then ultimately, basic access to the basic needs as people move forward as well. Move on here. Okay, I'd like to step back for a minute. I'll quit sharing this. If anybody has any questions kind of based on that, we can start there.
Any questions? Well, you must have done a great job. Oh, there, Representative Yin has a question.
Thank you, Senator Furphy, Chairman. Representative Summers also has a question, but I'll start very briefly. So I think in the first slide you mentioned, Mr. Kudera, that there are 12,421 homes with 110. Do you know how many homes are in the entire state to give like a point of comparison on how much that actually is?
Chairman Furphy. Yeah, Representative Yen, and I apologize. I meant to, it was in the notes, but I didn't bring it up. I don't have the exact number of homes per se, but considering that we ended up spending only just a hair over 52 million or committing over 52 million, I had a very high level study done for the state to bring the entire state to 25.3. And the basis of that led me to an $800 million to $1 billion result. And that's just to get what's left of our state, even after CARES, to 25.3. That doesn't continue going any past that. So even though we were successful with 12,000 homes, we're still significantly behind.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple questions. First of all, thank you for the presentation, Ryan. I wondered if you could email this to us. I was trying to stay up with you. I just couldn't quite keep up. And so if you wouldn't mind sending that, I would love to have that in the form of an email. But I did have a question just early on when you were giving the broadband numbers, and you talked about the new wireless towers, and you mentioned about, I think 66 new ones, 5 mixed use cellular towers. Are those towers that can be co-located by other companies, or are they mixed use in terms of what they can do? Just a little clarification on that.
Oh. Yeah, Chairman Furphy. Yeah, thanks, Senator Schuler. Yeah, the mixed use exactly is for like cellular mobile application as well as the wireless. It was for a wireless, fixed wireless broadband is what the towers were built for, but they can put up to 1 or 2 other mobile antenna applications as well. And especially, well, it's particularly to the Shell area. That was one big one that they deployed there.
Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Ryan, good to see you again. The question I was actually going to ask you was, did they get the cellular part of the tower at Shell, in the Shell area up, or is it something they're still waiting on?
Mr. Kudera.
With the, and I mean this, when I say cellular, I mean the Verizon or whoever is going up there to climb on with you.
Right, Chairman. Yeah. Hey, Senator Costa, I don't have my chalkboard this time, so I'm a little lost. Oh, sorry. Yeah, actually, they're in conversation with Verizon and whoever kind of they were kind of running with the idea of build it, they will come. And they had to do a little advertising, but yeah, it seems like they're gonna join up, just a matter of figuring out the logistics of it all.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So Ryan, I have a couple questions. One, how many projects, we've kind of heard, and maybe this is to Rob or you, how many projects were kind of left on the table? In other words, didn't get funded because they ran out of time or whatever. So kind of, because I heard at one point there were $80 million in applications you guys weeded through, or more than that, actually. And then you guys weeded through that and got down to a certain number, of which I thought was going to be around 80 million. And then it ends up being 50 million, and there were projects that didn't get built. So my question is, one question is how many projects were kind of left on the table, kind of ran out of time, timing, whatever. And then my second question, I do think Joanne Hovis's, I think that idea of mapping the locations, all the known addresses in Wyoming would be important in this mapping effort. And if a larger state can do it, if they have data sources, data pools, why don't we, and have you looked at that? So projects on the table, and do we have data on locations?
Ryan?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Representative Summers, to that extent, yeah, we left initial in the Connect Wyoming program, we left it open and just asked for applications. The original number was 81, and that was for 188 million, I believe. That was whittled down to around 50. Excuse me if I don't know the exact numbers, but that was whittled down to around 50, of which we deployed and sent out to the providers, say, okay, yeah, it's a good program, good project. But we reminded them the timeline. The timeline was short because even though CARES came with a year, by the time we got to that point, we were probably July. So we were already well past halfway. And so we left, and I think the second round there was around the $80 million mark. And then because of some of the projects took significant time, it ended up being, the total ending up award was right around 50, I think 58 originally. With 30, I'm sorry, I don't have that number right in front of you, with 36 or 38 projects that were actually funded to move forward and actually put in place. So there was a significant space there between what we actually could get deployed versus how many applied. And it all ran behind that speed to market that we were under the CARES Act. And that was for question one. Sorry. Question two, Representative Summers, as far as taking this down to the address block, that's going to be relatively simple. And I've been out of that realm for a long time, but I know what it was when it started. It was a little difficult when it comes to dealing with the E911 versus the other mapping. I think it's matured significantly since then. So I think it's just a matter of getting that E911 layer from wherever it resides, whether it's in those 29 PSAPs or it's county level, and just taking the layer from that, from those address data sets and bringing it into the map. I think, honestly, I'll speak for Teal at this point, but I think that would be a real, relatively low-hanging fruit once we can get access to that data.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So I do think that would be really good information, because one is people are only going to take speed tests where they have internet, and they may not take speed tests even if they have internet, because they may never take a speed test and just accept what they have. And so if you kind of know who's covered and who's not, or well, if you know where people are, and then you kind of get a sense where providers are at, is you're going to be getting that information, then I think it'll help narrow that down. So you confused me on the numbers. So, I know there were a lot of projects that didn't get funded, but some of them didn't get funded because they didn't meet your criteria. But what I want to know is how many projects didn't get funded that met your criteria that just kind of ran out of time.
Ryan?
Yeah, sorry, I was seeing if I could find it quick, but it's not gonna, we've got the data, it's just in a file. I'll have to find it. I can get it to you for sure. Yeah, just for the sake of your time, yeah, I'll move on. I'll definitely, if I can get that information, I'll get it sent to you right away.
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Chairman. And kind of a little bit of a response to Representative Summers' comment. I know when we were up in the Hyattville area, as Ryan was talking to the people involved, they were more than willing to get out and talk to people about speed tests and all, so that it would help better identify their areas and the speeds. I think the more we can get people that are on the ground interested, actively involved, talking to others, it'll help try to change that a little bit. So hopefully we can get more of those speed tests so that it does help with his stats and data.
Very good. Any other questions?
I've got more.
Go
Okay.
for it. Ryan. Yeah.
All right, thanks. We'll continue on into some of the things we're looking at in the federal side of things. Okay, you see a pretty green slide there. Okay. People make fun of me and my colors, but it's part of industry, so that's how we keep things straight. Oh, anyway, broadband grant opportunities. This is specific to NTIA. It was mentioned before, but Commerce Allowed is running 3 grants through the NTIA. First one is a broadband infrastructure grant. It's due in August. And when this slide was written, there's a tribal connectivity grant for $1 billion. It has been deployed now. And then there's a connecting minority communities, $285 million for historically Black colleges and tribal colleges. Unfortunately, Wyoming doesn't have any that qualify. The NBAM is what's known as the National Broadband Access Map. We've been participating with them since I believe about May of last year. Not only supplying data, but also garnering data and information from the federal map as well. And it pays homage. They just released a couple of weeks ago a census block level detail across the state that is far superior to the 477 grant. But they have yet to release anything that's sub-census block. And then finally, the State Broadband Leaders Network, they support that across going forward. That's where all the states across the nation get together and kind of compare notes and see what works and what doesn't, and if some have ideas, and just basically be building that collective network moving forward. They have a lot of interest in our Western states and how we do things.
So, Mr. Chairman, while we're on that slide,
Ooh.
I have a question.
Yeah, go forward.
So your first bubble, 2021 August, broadband infrastructure. What program is that?
That is the broadband infrastructure grant from NTIA. It is due August 17th. I've got more on that in the next slide. The other two, when this slide was made, were unknown at that time, and the state can't apply for either of those directly. So I just left them at 2021. We good, Chairman?
Yep. Go.
All right. So moving on with the NTIA and the broadband infrastructure grant, they kind of took a page out of our playbook and sent it to the state and to the localities for applying for this grant. And granted, there's only 288 million available nationally, and they're anticipating $5 million to $30 million grant awards. It was released May 24th. Application period is until August 17th. The 17th, of course, when it's due. Decisions are actually coming out the 15th of November, with awards towards the end of November. Once the award is made, the recipient has 1 year to complete it. This is the one that we did apply for. This webinar was Friday. So Friday morning, we had over 50 participants jump on and go through this webinar. Won't go through, I'll just take the highlights out here. Again, to point out, it's between NTIA, Broadband USA, and of course the Wyoming Business Council will be an applicant for that program. Going back through here, it's 288 million competitive grant, runs covered partnerships. The partnerships being public-private. The public-private would be between an incorporated city or a political subdivision of the state, including the state, for a partnership with one or multiple providers to provide a solution to an area. One thing we made very certain to be clear on was, yes, the state is making application, but that does not supersede any other community from making an application. So keep that in mind. Wyoming could actually have multiple winners on this should a community or county decide to follow this as well. Again, it's competitive and technologically neutral projects. Technologically neutral is going to be related to fixed broadband. So again, satellite's kind of out of this one. And then the curious part of this is the census block with at least one household or business that does not have access to 25.3. So the grant is written to where they would award on a sub-census block layer. We just have to prove to them that this one house or one business within that census block does not have coverage, which the providers and locals and even a lot of the visiting I've done around the state, we can identify the areas we know about. Moving on, the funding uses won't get into the weeds.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, back on that last slide, Ryan. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think in the ARP, kind of in the guidance on the ARP money with respect to broadband, that same language with at least one household is in there, which opens things up considerably because they don't have to, they can hit multiple households if they want, but they have to hit at least one with or one that does not have access to 25.3. So how are we going to go? I know you're mapping all that stuff, but literally that's almost every census block there is in Wyoming that's not in an urban setting. Is that accurate?
To some extent, yes. To other extents, there's more census blocks covered than we think. Sorry, Chairman.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Barbara if she's available on the thing to, somebody from industry to kind of talk about this and how we take advantage of this to make sure we get more broadband out there. So, Barbara, I'm sure you guys have seen this. What's your thoughts on how we take advantage of that? And it'll bother some providers because it means other providers could come in, but maybe that will incentivize those providers in that area to hit each individual household. So, thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. So Ryan and I have had some pretty good conversations about this. And one of the things I think it does, if we partner with the state, if the providers will partner with the state, we have an opportunity to actually take advantage of more grant dollars, I would expect, than if Silver Star was just to go out on it on our own and try and partner with a local municipality or something like that. So I actually really applaud the work that Brian and the Broadband Advisory Council and the Business Council are doing on this. I think it will actually get us more money than going it alone.
Ryan, you have comments on that?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Continue on.
Yeah, go for it, Ryan. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thing to work. Okay. And unlike Connect Wyoming, like Connect Wyoming, point one is cost of construction, all this. I won't get too far into the weeds here, but I want to point out number two is it does cover the cost of a long-term lease. So with different providers and all this, this will cover for terms greater than 1 year. This actually will expand past the 1 year build deadline that they placed for IRUs. So this program does allow IRUs and some other points. But to these points, I just wanted to provide this with you. And I did get this late into the LSO, so you guys should have access to this pretty quick. If not, I can definitely send it to you directly as well. And so I just wanted to share this. This is actually live on our webpage right now for our providers to go to. You can just go to wyomingbusiness.org /NTIA. And as everybody's coming out of COVID recovery, our providers are none the different, but broadband doesn't rest, so I guess neither do we. So we'll get back in the trenches as it's supposed to be. So then that leads us on to other federal opportunities. As we've talked before, American Rescue Plan, there's several sections out of the American Rescue Plan that do have broadband or connectivity portions of them. 602 being the state allocation, 2023, which is IMLS, that goes to our museum and library groups, 7402, which is, I think, ECD. I can't remember exactly what they call it in the Department of Ed realm, but that's funding V-rate for emergency connection and devices. And then finally, section 604, the coronavirus capital projects funds, the ability to build infrastructure, water, sewer, and broadband. We're looking at that. Rob's running the lead on that as we move forward. So it was kind of fun to have Scott here with the USDA, bringing in the RUS as well. Reconnect, they went over that. They have their RUS loans. Those are all provider specific. Rural broadband program, the state is eligible to be an applicant for that. DLT, every spring, the distance learning and telemedicine grant program comes out. That's the one that was mentioned that closed July 4th. The state is able to apply for that grant, as well as the next one, the Community Connect grant. We're able to apply for it as a state. One of the issues, as you guys are asking the questions, how can we move the needle? One of the ways we can move the needle is reintroduce. At one time, I think there was 300,000 of the 10 million set aside for match monies. I don't have that ability right now, but if we did, we could go after these grants because they do require matches. Unlike the NTIA grant, big part I forgot to mention is they're not asking for a match per se, but they are encouraging at least 10% because that'll be weighted heavier on selection. So while it's not required, of course, it'll help the application. Where the USDA grants, they do require a match, and it could be it's significant enough. It's not going to come out of just a general budget somewhere. So something we can think about moving forward. Then finally, the pending funding opportunities. Again, they're all over the place with ARP, and unfortunately, myself, I can't keep up with them all, but I'm trying to do what we can. USDA has some public works, infrastructure, broadband specific coming out. USAC has some healthcare provider eligible expenses coming out. IMLS grants, I mentioned that earlier. This would be independent of ARP as well. Health and Human Services have some coming out, as well as Homeland Security. Haven't been talking statewide, but been talking federally, and we might have opportunity for Camp Guernsey moving forward. So that kind of brings us to the end of the opportunities statewide. Just bring in a little bit of what we've been doing the past year on our agency partners. And that's everybody we're starting to work with. We've dealt with or worked with YDOT before, really starting to pick up more with HB 14 and that working group, and working significantly with Department of Ed, really, and the Department of Health since last year. This year, we're introducing game and fish, state parks, as well as tourism. Because with all of these, as we reach out to these other areas, not only our communities, we can utilize some of these aspects to expand the networks to the citizens along the way. My case with the parks being, North Ohioville, a place I didn't know existed until you go to visit. And as I promised earlier, here's that K12 survey the Department of Education spoke of. It resides at yobbmap.org. This is actually from the main page where you can go in, student families can go in and take the survey. The survey does ask about connectivity. It also asks about devices, if it's shared, if it's individual, if it's provided, if it's something you purchased. And it gives you a lot of overreaching information. What it does allow us to do on the analytics side is give a per district capability to measure access to broadband infrastructure. Again, the more we can get the district participation in this, be it by mandate or be it by marketing, the better off we're going to be, definitely for the K12 as well as the state map. And then we have device measurement for each district. Analytics of family impact of underserved or undersubscribed to broadband. That's the analytics where we can actually go in and say, okay, a family's got an issue or several families have an issue in an area. We can take a deeper dive into that, look into the data sets themselves and identify if it is an affordability issue, if it's an access issue, if it's an infrastructure issue, and figure that out from the data we receive through this survey. And then additionally, it provide analytics to evaluate opportunities for access equity. That's, the education piece y'all were talking about earlier. And then enhance reporting capabilities to the Wyoming Department of Education. So that while they have the pieces they need from the student information system, we can provide the further support of the infrastructure availability. Then coming back here.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it, Mr. Representative.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So Ryan, back on the student thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we heard in some testimony that, probably the state's doing the best job, and I'm not saying we should, but that actually had somebody dedicated to contacting these families. And so I'm not sure that just having a web page with a survey thing is going to get it, because I'm not sure you're going to, one, the survey, whether you got connectivity, that's one thing, but on the issue of making sure that the people with the students of poverty get access, it may require a real hands-on effort. And so is the state, the governor's office, trying to think about how you reach those families, those students, whether that's through DFS or districts or whatever, but I think somebody needs to ride herd on that a little bit.
Yeah, Chairman.
Yes, go.
Representative Summers. Yeah, at this point, what we'd end up doing is this is where we really engage with the districts themselves, relying upon them. In fact, I sent packets out to every district that had the postcard back from several years ago. If you don't have service, you can fill out a postcard saying, hey, I don't have service, it's postage paid. Actually ask the students if they took them home, just bring them back to the office or their teacher, and then the district can actually drop that in the mail, and then we put that in the mapping itself. The other thing that we're doing, and again, it's not a help center like I believe was presented earlier, but we are incorporating this into fall enrollment packages as well as back to school packages as well. So they'll see it multiple times moving forward. Again, to knock on doors, we haven't done that yet. I mean, it's something we could be, but I'll be honest, I'm having a hard time just visiting the communities across the state, much less homes. So it would definitely be a much heavier lift. But yeah, it's plausible.
Just a follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Ryan, that's why I'm asking the question, of you or Rob Krieger, one of the two. Is I think on the issue of people in poverty, people with children in poverty, that's data. You know who those people are. They're the free and reduced lunch. You've got a record of that. Now, so is somebody like DFS going to reach out to families? Or are you looking at a strategy? I mean, I get it. You got more than you can do, but is somebody going to run this to ground? That's my question for you or Rob. Is somebody looking in how to get the most effect out of those federal dollars for poverty, that $50 a month and those devices, that we actually get it to the people that need it and not just post it on a website?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chairman. Okay. Yeah. And to that end, yeah, the one thing that I did do when it was coming out is went back to the Department of Ed, and actually even the Department of Health. My contact with the Department of Health, I gave the information to her as well, and they were going to put it out to their channels as well. What they did with it, I don't know, but I did provide the information to those two agencies.
Okay, Senator Schuler had a question, and then followed by Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, my question follows right along with what Representative Summers. We must be thinking on the same wavelength. With the survey, I understand, that the districts will probably do the best job they can with mass mailings and that sort of thing. And maybe in there, you mentioned the fall enrollment packages. But I do think we need maybe a collaborative approach to maybe marketing the survey, whether it be from the Wyoming Business Council, the State Department of Education, also the broadband folks, maybe the governor's office, a variety of people. I think Representative Summers mentioned DFS and a number of others, but I think it needs to be a full court press. It's my basketball terminology coming out. I think we need to, because I think that data will tell us so much, and we need to find out really, again, who's not being served and why. And so I don't think that it's all a broadband issue for just the council or for Ryan's group. I think it's everybody. And I think we do. And you mentioned earlier about how you've been working and trying to collaborate with so many entities, including YDOT and various others. But I think maybe all of these groups can help us collaborate and come up with a great marketing so that everybody in the state understands how important this data is, not just for our students, but for the folks in Wyoming. Thank you.
Ryan, you have comments on that?
As soon as I can get my mouse to cooperate, sorry. Yeah, some of the issues I did run into early on with dealing with WDE is the fact that we are dealing with minors. So there's a ton of overlying regulations of information that they can't share. And that's exactly why we went the way we did with being able to publish the SIS data and all this, is if they can't acquire that and provide it back to me, they can't due to federal regs. So with that, that's why we decided we're going to front it with the Business Council and our efforts and then feed it back to the districts. And likewise with, I would imagine, I don't know, but I imagine to be similar on the DFS.
Representative Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some of my questions were answered. Our educators on here know, but just a warning to the Wyoming Business Council, if you don't already know, kiddos, any information you send, especially with the smaller, younger groups, it doesn't get home. It goes in the backpack and it goes straight to the trash. So any important information that we give isn't going to get home at all. And the busier some of these families are, it's never seen. So that is not a good way for us to get this information out. So the free and reduce, they already know, they already have that data and such. So the flyer is not a way to get that information home in the backpack. So just fair warning, it doesn't work.
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Duncan is almost totally correct, but it's not just the little kids, even the oldest kids don't even get it home. But the other part of that is they do have all the free and reduced, but I know due to federal requirements, none of that can be released. So that's extremely confidential information that the schools have to keep confidential. So it's going to take some other ways of getting around that. But I think working together, we can all figure out a good way. We might have to use a full court press as a half court press with a zone, but we'll get there one way or the other. So.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I guess just what I want to, and so I'm going to put Rob Krieger on the spot here, because I've already put Ryan on the spot twice. So I just want to make sure somebody's herding the cats. I don't care who the cat is that has to do it, but we just need to make sure it's somebody's job to ensure that this gets to the right place and to see that it gets done. And I know you can't force districts to do it, but they're not going to not do it for these free and reduced kids. They're going to do it. It's we just need to make sure they all know and follow up once in a while and go, hey, did you get that information out to those folks? And we can't, and this is where I'm going to stick up for Ryan, and it's the way we budget. We can't dump everything on Ryan. And if that's the case, if we need more Ryan, then we need to look at, do any of these federal dollars allow us to spend money to help get more of this out and more of this work done? So that's another question I would have for you, and that we could look at is, do we need to fund a position out of ARPA dollars for a couple of years to get this broadband work done?
Yeah,
Mr. Krieger.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, thank you. And Representative Summers, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think partnering with DFS is the solution to that. And like you said, making sure someone rides herd on that to make sure that's getting to those folks. Because you're right, those are the folks that work with these families every day, and they know, those contacts. And Representative Duncan, to your point, it won't go in a backpack and then do a garbage can. So I think that is the solution there. To your question about ARPA dollars, to really provide some help to Ryan and his, I don't even call it his shop because it's a one-man crew. So it's, I have noticed that other states are doing that. There's other states that have used their own money in the past to stand up a more broadband office. And I've heard from I'm on the calls with Republican Governors Association and Western governors, and that is a theme that is building with the amount of money coming in, especially for broadband, that their broadband coordinators do need some extra help. So that is something I think worth looking into for the next few years as we deploy these massive amounts of federal dollars we're getting.
Very good. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keep in mind too, that some of these free and reduced lunch people do not qualify for DFS. So you're not going to catch everybody at DFS. So another person that you might work through is, we've got to keep maybe the school counselors, the principals, the superintendents. The superintendent can filter through down, and the principal is the one that's going to have the information, or the counselors or whatever. They're going to know. But DFS is not the end all be all, because a lot of these free and reduced lunch, they may qualify for the free and reduced for poverty, but they don't qualify for DFS services. So don't forget that they're in that gap. So that even though they may qualify for that, they don't qualify for, and DFS will never see them. So we'll miss a whole group of people if we go through DFS. So just keep that in mind too.
Center cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other thing that we can do is parent-teacher conferences, especially in the elementary, is a huge place where all the parents meet up with the teachers. So we can provide those things for the teachers and they can give them to all parents. It doesn't matter. If a parent doesn't qualify, they don't have to fill it out. But just another layer that we can give out that best helps reach those out. At the middle school and high school, there's not quite as many parent-teacher conferences as far as the number of parents that come in, but there still are parents that come in. So it could be a good, another avenue to get those out a second time. Like Shelley says, she's exactly right in what she's saying. Sorry, Representative Duncan.
Yeah, Barbara Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to let everyone know that the providers are also marketing and putting this out there as well. So it's a joint effort with both providers and the school system.
Very good. I have one quick question for Ryan. Kind of change of subject a little bit, but Ryan, seeing all those grant opportunities, are we giving up money? If we hired a grant writer to help you, would that be of benefit? Sounds like we're leaving thousands of dollars on the table. Is that correct?
Yeah, Chairman Furby, yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of why we went ahead and moved forward with that NTIA grant is the very fact that we could be stepping over millions by not going after it at the federal level.
Okay. Representative Summers, that's something we ought to keep in mind too as we're going forward. Okay, any further questions? Okay, Mr. Krieger, you were up next. You want to give us an update from the governor's office?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the task force, Rob Krieger, advisor to Governor Gordon. You know, our good broadband manager hit most of the points and in better detail than I can. But, you know, when we talk about the Connect Wyoming program last year and the, 12,000 homes we hit and the 600 plus businesses and the amount of money we got out, those are all great successes. But I do think one thing that goes somewhat unseen is the partnership we had with you, Chairman Summers, and this task force last year. As you well know, we had a special session. We were provided some flexibility in this office to use those dollars, and Treasury guidance was kind of changing as we went. And once we got the green light for broadband, we really hunkered down and worked with you all to get that rolling to what I think was a very successful program and a good guidepost for what we want to do in the future. So I do thank you all in this task force for helping us last year get to that final product. One of the questions, Representative Summers, that you had that I think I can provide a little more clarity to, and Ryan can back this up when he sends the final numbers out. The governor back about a year ago put $100 million towards the Connect Wyoming program. Now, when we opened up that program, I believe we got 184 million in applications. A lot of those applications, when Ryan and I were sifting through them, were overbuilds or a certain provider upgrading their services where they already had 25.3, but they're upgrading it to a higher speed, which didn't meet the qualifications we had in the initial Connect Wyoming program. So that number got dwindled down to about 80-ish million that we felt comfortable awarding to the providers. Now, the final number you see is a little over 50 million. The reason for that is some of the providers we worked with, one was a large highway build, a large build to Shoshone, places like that. Frankly, they just ran into the time frame. We had the end of the year that just wasn't feasible for them. They didn't feel comfortable taking the risk of accepting those dollars or that application and not necessarily being able to beat the winner if that was early, or any supply chain issues or anything like that. So they decided not to. And that again brought that number down to about 52 million. I think going forward, that is something we're going to be able to knock out, in the, call it Connect Wyoming 2.0, because I think we have a good guidepost of that program. But hopefully those applications will come through again. We'll be able to accept those. I would say you asked which ones were not completed. 11 of the 31 projects were not completed. Now, of that 11, I've been assured that 7 of those are at least 90% complete. And Mr. Krieger hit on it earlier that all those providers have assured us that they will finish those on their own dime by the end of this year. So those projects are still being built out and being completed. We touched on mapping, so I won't go back into that. The governor did award $200,000 to the Business Council to contract that out and try to get some mapping done. And that's all really in preparation for the Connect 2.0 program. The way we see this going forward, and I've spoken to a lot of providers around the state to get their sense for it and make sure it sounded like something that would work for them, is to really use the Connect Wyoming program as the guide, use some of the legislation that you all passed last session as some more guidance, because while we did what I think was a good program, there certainly was things we could have done better. We were on a tight time frame. This time we're not as much. So things like a protest period, I think we can do that now, allow folks to challenge whether or not they serve or don't serve that area already. And so the timeline we kind of see in this office for a second iteration of Connect Wyoming would be to open it up this fall. We'd have the rulemaking process, open that up to the public for any comments on the rules, and then open up that program and accept applications. As we accept those applications, we would obviously have a date where we shut that off to where Ryan and I, and if there's any contracted help, we'll sit down and go through all the applications and see which ones fit our criteria and that we would want to award. I think at that point, I think the timeline could line up well with when you all are back here in February to know what the demand is, the dollar figure. I saw the draft legislation. I think that's a really good start, the 100 million. But just to see what that is. So then at that point in the winter, when you guys are here for session, we can award those. So each provider is ready to roll in the spring in the 2022 build season to get this going. One luxury the ARPA funds has is they have until 2026 to build this out. And so we won't run into, I hope we won't run into supply issues and coming up against a short time frame for some of these longer highway builds that were proposed last time. So that's kind of a high level overview and timeline of where we think in the governor's office would like to move forward with broadband funding. And then Ryan touched on all the other pots that are open for federal, but that's kind of where we are. With that, I'll stand for any question.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I, I've run this up the tree to your boss, but and I would like to hear from Barbara on this, but I would really like to see, even if it's a small amount of CARES Act, go out this summer, or, go out this, even September 1st, if there's some small projects that could be completed. And I just think we have a really good opportunity. I think you've got a lot of CARES Act money. And I think there's the ability to put a little bit of that, fairly quickly into broadband. So we just kind of keep the momentum going. And so I guess my first question is to Barbara. Are we too late realistically to get anything out this, because there's a timeline on that CARES Act dollar, right? That's December 31st again, I think. And so the question to Barbara is, are we too late now to get any projects on the ground if they went forward with a little bit of money on the CARES Act?
Barbara, you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Perhaps, and the reason I say perhaps is because you do have supply chain issues. So if providers had some inventory sitting around and some shovel-ready projects, you could probably still accomplish something. Idaho has released their remaining CARES dollars. We saw that a couple weeks ago. But there is serious supply chain issues right now. You've got conduit that's 16 weeks out. You've got fiber that's 30 to 40 weeks out. So unless the providers have stuff in stock, it would be really tough. But I believe that we should try, because I do think that there are some who have stocked up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I appreciate that. And so, Rob, one thing I'm going to ask this group is maybe a recommendation to the governor to try to get some CARES Act money out now, and then move forward. The other question I have, kind of on the ARP dollars, is we'll go into session. We'll bring, hopefully we'll get a bill. Hopefully we'll get a bill that will go to appropriations or wherever, and then we'll be successful getting that through at some level. And I've seen the guidance so far on ARP. We don't know exactly, if I'm not mistaken, what the guidance is on the capital construction piece. So in other words, we know that's got to go for connectivity, that whole 109 million for the state. But do we have any guidance on that yet? Do you know? I haven't asked lately.
Mr. Krieger?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I am not aware of any further guidance on the capital construction. I think with all this money, I think there's so many different pots. I think we're just looking at the total amount we'd like to put towards broadband, which is where I would lean on you all.
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one thing I would think that we could possibly use some of that, if there was some leftover projects that they ran out of time on, they may have their materials or whatever that they had ordered for that. And so they may be able to clean up those projects in a process if we can get the money to them so they can go ahead and move forward. So I think there might be a couple of options for ways for some of these companies to go ahead and move forward. I know the supply out to the future, like Barbara said, is really difficult at best. So I'm thinking if they had stuff that they had planned for the previous projects and ran out of time, so they were unable to do it or whatever, if they happen to have those materials on hand, they might be able to utilize that money. If we can use it, we ought to give it a shot.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond to that. Senator Cost, I think you bring up a good point. One concern I do have, and Representative Summers touched on this, we do have that deadline again in December. Really the last thing I would want is that we in good faith open this up to providers to build, whether that's a fiber build or whatnot, and it's say an early winter or weather issues or whatnot, and CARES Act most likely will not get extended again. If that were the case, we as the state would have to claw that money back from those providers. The providers I've talked to so far, and it's been a number of them, have concerned about, as Barbara talked, the supply chain issues as well as construction crews, that those are backed up, and getting that lined out could be an issue as well. But I agree. I mean, I feel like we have a lot of money and a lot of time with the ARPA money. I think we can stand up a really good program. Ryan, again, being by himself, it can only do so much. And I think mapping and then standing up that program in the fall is the best moving forward. I would also note there's other providers that did not participate in Connect Wyoming because of the deadline. And we did assure them last year that we would not extend that deadline. And I don't want to go back on that word to them, because there was quite a few of them that, didn't feel comfortable, coming up against that deadline. Because as you all know, the federal government didn't change or add the extension until really the last minute last year. So that's something else to keep in mind that I think is important.
Barbara?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Mr. Krieger. If we do not open that up for additional funds this year, will that money go back to the federal government? Will we lose some of that, or will it roll?
Yes,
Mr. Chairman, I believe it will, but it's the whole pot of the CARES Act. So that it's not necessarily just the broadband section. And I am not the expert on this, but there's other, I know Director McKay, our policy director, is kind of running this whole deal. But we do have ways of spending the CARES Act money on other needs as well. So you are right. Any leftover CARES dollars would end up going back to the feds. But the pot for broadband is not necessarily only for broadband. We can use it in other areas as well. And I'm not sure how they have that allotted out.
Mr.
Follow
Sessions?
up, please.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess my comment would be is if there is a chance that we could lose that money, I would rather see it put out there for projects and let providers take that risk and see if we can spend some more of that money.
Mr. Chairman, I would add, we certainly don't want to turn any money back to DC. So we're doing all we can to make sure and get that out and be as responsible with the money as possible.
Further questions? Ryan, did you have a comment? Ryan, you're muted still.
There. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, to further answer Representative Summers' question, what came out was 37 applications for $86 million, of which 6 contracts totaling $33,286,000 were declined due to time constraints. We awarded those, but those that were awarded decided they were going to step away because of the 1-year time constraint. So that would be the number there. So 37 were approved for funding. 6 contracts were declined, leaving a total of 31 projects for the $52,847,000 as presented.
Further questions? Mr. Krieger, do you have anything?
I don't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I guess next on our agenda is Ms. Zergo with the Wyoming Telecommunications Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, again, Liz Zerga of the Wyoming Telecom Association. I'm here today to talk about ARPA and a little bit on what my industry sees going forward regarding demand in Wyoming for connectivity. So I told you before that our carriers, the Rural Association, Wyoming Telecom Association, is primarily fiber providers. And one of the things, as I listened to the testimony earlier today, that struck me is a sense that at least some of you who are new on the committee, I want to indicate that prior to the CARES Act, a good portion of Wyoming did have 25/3. In other words, 25 megabits down and 3 up at least. My carriers who provide fiber provide connectivity at gigabit symmetrical services. And so there were many towns already in Wyoming where the carriers that I represent prior to CARES Act had deployed fiber to the premises and were providing gigabit symmetrical services. In addition, the carriers that I represent also have cable. Some of them have cable capability. So down in southwest Wyoming, they provide what they call gigabit capable service, and that is typically service just slightly under 1,000 megabits per second download and up to 40 megabits per per second upload. So pre-existing the CARES Act, in the territories they served, these carriers already had very, very high quality, very high speed, very redundant networks. They had also already stepped outside their traditional territories and expanded to other areas to provide those same robust, fiber-based, scalable networks to provide high-speed broadband. So where was Wyoming when all of the push regarding broadband started? At the time, one of the independent ranking and groups that ranks Wyoming's broadband ranked us initially, I think 3-4 years ago, and Mr. Chairman Summers will remember this, we were ranked 48th in the nation. Prior to the spending of CARES Act funds last September, the same entity, Broadband Now, ranked us 46th. So we had moved up a couple of places. And then as you heard through Ryan Cadera and Rob Krieger, Wyoming used, thanks to the foresight of Mr. Chairman and the members of this committee, the Broadband Task Force, Wyoming used CARES Act funding, and as a result of that, there was an explosion of projects the last quarter. Certainly the CARES Act funding, because of its a couple of constraints, left us with the situation where we need more funding to be able to move up in ranking with respect to broadband and to stay competitive in the national market and to connect the citizens of Wyoming. So that gives you a little bit of background as to where we were. And what I would say now is that robust, scalable broadband infrastructure is critically important for the future of Wyoming. It's probably the most critical infrastructure asset of our time. We need it in Wyoming, as do others, for economic development, education, workforce preparedness, and healthcare. And in order for Wyoming to stay in the game, it must take advantage of every opportunity that it has to fund broadband infrastructure in this state, especially infrastructure that is scalable, that can reach high speeds. And in this case, it's often fiber infrastructure. So according to the Fiber Broadband Association, if bandwidth usage continues at its current rate with connected homes and the demands made for the way we are using broadband, the average US fixed broadband speed will need to be 1,500 megabits per second down and 599 megabits per second upload by 2030. The rate of demand for increased upload speeds, which is sending information up into the internet, is increasing faster than it ever has. Today, according to Broadband Now, Wyoming, they've done a survey with respect to whether or not Wyoming has 100 down, 20 up. And there's a good portion of the state that still does not have access to that. So what do we look at when we look at ARPA? Why, some people say ARP, some people say ARPA. ARPA is unique in the ability to use the funding for broadband in several ways compared to the other programs that you've heard about. Many of the federal funding programs have not benefited Wyoming to the extent that they could because they are at the census block level. And I know you heard a little bit about that. Wyoming has very large census blocks. And so many of the federal funding opportunities or programs or grants still rely upon that census block concept, which is that if one person in that very large census block has 25.3, or in some cases as low as 10.1, depending on the program, you cannot access the funding to be able to utilize it in Wyoming for that census block. ARP is different. ARP allows you to get down to the level. Basically, the way ARP is written, according to Treasury guidance, you can get down to the level of much, much smaller than the census block and fund that. And that is critically important for Wyoming. That is one very good reason to use ARP dollars to fund broadband. A second reason to use ARP dollars to fund broadband is Wyoming has been provided a couple of pots of money at the state level through ARP. The first one that you heard mentioned was 602. And 602 is the general grant to the state. It's a little over $1 billion. With respect to that grant, Treasury guidance specifically provides that one of the eligible expenditures is broadband infrastructure. And so that is a large pot of money. And there are constraints outside of spending it on water, sewer, and broadband as to how you can utilize that money. What other states have found as they have created legislation to spend the similar kind of 602 funding is that because of the constraints that are put on what else you can spend it on, they're left with a sum of money that it can really only be spent on water, sewer, and broadband. And so it's critically important that with respect to 602 money, you look at spending some of that money on broadband. One of the things that I will advocate for and my companies advocate for is it's important to not just look at 604 money under ARPA. So 604 is the capital construction projects. And there's $109 million allotted to Wyoming. And that is what's in your original draft of your bill is the 604 funding. That $109 million really based on Treasury guidance, I think you've heard, and I'll reiterate, is that is to be spent on broadband infrastructure. It's for connectivity, for workforce, telehealth, and education. So really that funding is for infrastructure, but there is a little bit of an issue with that 604 money that isn't present with the 602 funding, which is the general state funding. The 604 funding requires the creation of a state plan that has to be submitted, I guess, to Treasury as we understand it currently. The indication was that 90 days after the ARPA funding was made available, that there would be updated guidance as to what has to go into the state plan that's submitted, that has to be approved before you can disperse any of that money. And to my knowledge, and I looked last week, but I didn't look Friday, nor did I look this morning, but to my knowledge, Treasury still has not issued that guidance as to what should be in that plan. So right now, currently, you cannot access the 604 money to spend it on broadband. You would have to have an approved plan, and there is no guidance available to date as to what should be in that plan, how you should assemble it, when it should be submitted, what the timing is for turnaround as to when that will be approved. And so our goal is to have you look at both 602 and 604 out of the ARP funding. And the reason to look at both 602 and 604 is 602 has the flexibility to allow you to be able to utilize that funding as soon as rules are in place with the Wyoming Business Council for the Connect 2 round of projects. And why is that important? Why is it important to be kind of ahead of the game in relation to other states? You heard a little bit from Ms. Sessions about the supply chain issue. The supply chain issue is real, and to the extent that Wyoming can be in one of the leading states, and there are a handful of states that have already legislated on their ARP money for broadband. But to the extent Wyoming can be in one of the leading states to utilize its 602 money, some of it, a portion of it, on broadband projects and get those out the door without having to wait for 604 broadband approval from Treasury, you can be ahead of ordering for supply chain, workforce for broadband entities to be able to get those projects in the ground, starting in the spring of 2022. My concern is that if we wait until next session to start talking about utilization of any of the 602 money, we will be behind the 8 ball in the ability to get the things that we need to do to have the projects in the ground. So that's kind of a high level overview of how we're viewing ARPA. We're very excited about the prospect of another round of Connect 2 projects. I know my clients, many of them were bidders in the original Connect 1. Some of them were awarded projects. We are the carriers that put in the fiber to the 5,000 plus homes in less than 90 days. Some of my carriers are the carriers who initially applied for CARES Act funding, but once the awards were made available, there wasn't enough time left and they knew it. So they still have projects that they'd like to see put in. I did query my carriers about what kinds of dollars are we talking about for projects, given that they have to be completed by 2026. And their response back to me was, in total, if Connect Wyoming 2 was able to get grant funding out the door in very early 2022 so that they could know and have engineering and permitting and all of those kinds of things in place, they could easily deploy projects in excess of $300 million, provided they had funding to do so. So the demand is there, the need is there. The last thing I would say about ARP dollars that is special compared to some of the other funding opportunities is the ARP Treasury guidance has considerable flexibility with respect to determining what an unserved or underserved area is. In this regard, the Treasury guidance says at one point, unserved and underserved are anything below 25.3, which is the standard FCC definition. However, in subsequent Treasury guidance, Treasury indicates that not only can you break the census block and look at smaller, more granular level to determine where unserved and underserved is, but that you should avoid overbuilding where there is a carrier that already supplies 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per second up. There is a very strong implication in that anything that is below 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per second up is fair game for upgrading for broadband. And that is the position that Montana took with respect to their definition of underserved. Unserved was 25.3, underserved 100 megabits per second down, 20 up. So that provides a really unique opportunity for Wyoming. The other thing that ARP does is it tells you what you should be looking for in technology to supply the answer. And according to ARP, they go through an analysis of what a family of 4 would need for current day modern needs for telework, telehealth, and teleeducation. And they conclude that the 25.3 is not adequate for a family of 4, that today's needs, it just simply won't meet it. So Treasury guidance says what you should seek as a solution is a minimum of 100 megabits per second down, 100 megabits per second up. That's important. That's critically important. What you want to do is have a solution that's for the future. You don't want to end up with a network that you have spent money on that is not scalable and cannot meet the demands of the future. So with that, I think that's my overview of ARP. We look really forward to what this next year brings in terms of grant opportunities and in our ability to deploy broadband to the customers of Wyoming, and look forward to working with you in partnership to do that.
Thank you for that important update. Do we have questions? Anyone have questions? Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Liz, the only question I have is the same on the CARES Act. Do you think if we recommend to the governor to bring out some dollars out of CARES Act would obviously go away in December, do you think there'd be any interest in providers, or do you think it's short a time frame?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, Mr. Co-Chairman. So with respect to the CARES Act funding that's left over, you may recall from this last session, I was a strong advocate for using leftover CARES Act funding to the extent it existed to get some broadband projects out this summer and this fall. And in discussions with the governor's office, and I'm sympathetic to the situation, the plight that we are in, and that is this. The governor's office, when they put out the criteria for the initial CARES Act, at the time you had to complete your project by December 31st, 2020. And all carriers were told before they signed the contract, and the contract provided that the funding would end December 31st, 2020. Your project had to be done then. You weren't going to get paid for anything that went beyond that. And that did result in some carriers turning down money that they were awarded and other carriers not even applying. So I agree with the governor's office that what they would have to do is they couldn't simply award funding to leftover projects that weren't finished. That would not be the same rules of the game. So you would have to take a new round of applications. And during the spring session, I was an advocate that we do that we get that done. And with ARPA funding coming down, with the broadband mapping initiative that Mr. Krieger is engaged in, what they have indicated to me is they want to focus their time and effort on that. It's a bigger pot of money, ARPA is. The mapping endeavor is a heavy lift, and they have to do the rules for Connect Wyoming 2. There's only so much of Ryan to go around on this. So if it was just me telling you what the carriers want, absolutely the carriers would want Connect Wyoming CARES Act funding available, yesterday or tomorrow, so they could do those projects. And do I think some could be done? Yes, we're pushing up against some pretty hard timelines, but some of my carriers probably do have available fiber that's left over that they could. But at the same time, I'm sympathetic with the plight of Ryan and regarding where do you focus your time and energy. And so I'm caught in between. That's the frank answer to that. If there were 2 Ryans and 2 Rob Kriegers, I'd say, yeah, let's get this done tomorrow. But there's not. And some of my carriers are probably listening to this right now and wishing for those CARES Act funds, and they would probably like to say, let me have that microphone, because their answer would be yes. Yes, they would like that. But looking at the big scheme of things and trying to, sort out what's the most important and where do we spend our time and money, I think you get the sense. I'm in between.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
just a quick follow-up. Thank you. Well, I appreciate that, Liz, and I do appreciate the pinch on Ryan. The challenge is, just to be honest, ARPA money's not going to go out the door for broadband until after the session. I just don't see that happening because of the limit, basically, that's been agreed to that the governor can spend after September 1st. So I don't see a pot of ARPA money going out. Maybe I'm wrong, but if it is, it's limited amount of money going out prior till after next session. So I think there's going to be plenty of time to stand up that. The question is, do we want to try to get a few CARES Act projects out? I think that's a question. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond to that?
Yes, please go for it.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, our hope was that with the authorization to the governor to be able to utilize CARES Act funding, 302 funding, September 1, we were hopeful that some of that funding would be utilized for broadband grants before session started, for awards of grants. If that is not the case, if that's not the intent of the legislature, then the focus on Connect Wyoming, what there is left, becomes important. It becomes really important. So I guess I would say we would like to see funding, if at all possible, for some projects and awards before session of next year, and whatever pot of funds that comes out of. That's the goal, is to keep projects going and in the pipeline and not wait and delay.
Very good. Further questions? All right. Well, let's keep moving along on the agenda. Next up is Brian Worthen with Visionary Broadband. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Broadband Task Force. I appreciate your group for your interest and support and action to increase broadband access in our state. And I appreciate the invite extended to me today. I'm an appointee of the Broadband Advisory Council, the group attached to the Business Council that reviews money established by Senate File 100 back in 2018. And as a member of the Broadband Advisory Council, we're here to make recommendations to the Business Council on worthy projects for them to decide upon. Initially, the broadband bill established a $10 million fund to assist in economic diversification and established an advisory council and broadband coordinator. And statutorily, it supported public-private partnerships through an RFP process initiated by a city, town, county, joint powers board, or tribal government. The Business Council, the broadband coordinator, and the advisory council has input on each application, and there's a challenge process by which a provider can show it has or has not immediate plans to provide service in the same area. And it created the committee and task force of the legislature and provides for 2 legislative liaisons to the advisory council. The recent revisions to that statute established by Senate File 100 adds an agency as a potential partner. And I think that's in an effort to get those funds deployed and out the door. There's been difficulties in spending the funds that were allocated. And overall, there's a couple of issues that I want to point out as a member of the Broadband Advisory Council. One is the overall fund is too small for fiber projects. So with the fund being at $10 million and each project capped at 5, that money does not go a long ways. But more importantly, and this is something I realized, is larger communities are in the best position to participate. Smaller communities, such as towns, struggle, and in some counties as well, with an ability to generate an RFP. They don't have a legal resource. They have a part-time attorney that is not a town employee or a county employee, and they lack a governmental champion to push that through their organization. And so as a Broadband Advisory Council, we've not seen those funds deployed. And I think the last thing I would make a comment on is providers are hesitant to invest in the engineering study and the time with no guarantee of return on that. In other words, if they're working with the community initially to establish a layout or even responding to a community layout that comes to us through to a provider through an engineering firm or a consultant, there's no guarantee of award, obviously, but there's also no ownership of the asset. And so it's been difficult for providers to get behind that program, in my eyes. How does Senate File 100 differ from Connect Wyoming? I want to point out, I believe that Connect Wyoming was a success as a model between the state and a provider, because it allowed private industry to move at the pace of private industry. It improved services across the state, for sure, and it has started to move the needle. And it was important that it started bridging those gaps in Wyoming's broadband. So you might ask, what's the path forward for the Broadband Advisory Council? And that, I believe, is fivefold. One is to sponsor and encourage participation among providers. That could be through an annual broadband summit, which is not occurring at present. 2 would be to provide resources for communities to partner in a public-private partnership and provide a central RFP template and legal resource to smaller communities. 3, I believe the Broadband Advisory Council should do a better job at communicating with providers to actually file their FCC reports, showing they actually service an area. There are a number of providers that are so small in the state. They're doing a great job, but they're too small to know that this needs to be done. And so funds keep getting handed out on top of them again and again. And then lastly, to act as a secondary point for communities to communicate with the Wyoming Business Council. Now I'd like to shift gears and talk to you as Brian Worthen, the CEO of Visionary Broadband. And I want to point out that Visionary is not a telephone company. We're not a cable company. We're not a cellular company. We're simply a builder of broadband. Prior to Connect Wyoming, Visionary and my brother and I and our peers carved out modest success in the state, having focused solely on internet since 1994. So this has always been our business, and this is our business focus. And during Connect Wyoming, what's interesting is Visionary achieved success, and it's the first time we've received funds in this fashion as a participant in Connect Wyoming. And this success, I believe, is scalable and repeatable. So in roughly 90 days, Visionary completed 56 miles of fiber, 45 new towers, augmented another 14 towers to further reach into grant areas and build fiber to the home in 4 communities. And what was most beneficial to us, and we didn't know this going in, was the labor potential. Rather than bring in all out-of-state companies, we actually retasked oil field companies. So we hired 5 oil field contractors, 4 fabrication companies, 6 construction companies, 5 tower construction companies. We put a lot of folks to work. I was receiving pictures and texts at Thanksgiving dinner. We had contractors in Sublette County the entire week of Christmas. There were a lot of hours, and I think that was spoke to previously in today's meeting, put in to get these projects done by December 30th. And I'm proud to have participated in that program. But I attribute the success of that program to the fact it was an agreement directly between the state and the provider. Our broadband coordinator and the business council during the Connect Wyoming 2020 rollout and the establishment of rules identified a need for improved data. And so I'm glad to hear that we're putting money towards mapping. The FCC commissioners themselves have recognized that mapping is not sufficient, and we shouldn't be reliant on federal mapping. And I'll bring that up a little later. It's stale. The federal mapping is. It's actually published up to a year after service has been rolled out, and so it's actually not even reflective of the investment my company and others in Wyoming have made throughout the state. During Connect Wyoming, and I want to be clear about this, I feel that Wyoming led the U.S. in figuring out how to make CARES dollars go to broadband. Not all the states opened up CARES to broadband, and some of them opened up funds out of CARES for reimbursement of monthly service, and that does not alone justify a build or construction. So I applaud Wyoming for leading the U.S. and taking a proactive approach. And I believe too, Wyoming can continue to be a leader in broadband funding that moves beyond the confines of the federal definition. So the potential here, and what I want to speak to is the potential of ARPA to continue from the last discussion, or the potential, as Mr. Krieger referred to, as Connect Wyoming 2.0. I am supportive of purposeful planning and love that ARPA has an extended timeline. Last year was very difficult for myself and my staff. And per Mr. Kudra, we did take a break in Q1 because we put in a lot of hours. And what's important about ARPA is, with the funds needing to be allocated by 2024 and expended by 2026, that additional time means there's opportunity to put more fiber in the ground. Fiber is the preference and is the most future-proof solution out on the horizon today. And I would also emphasize that by saying fiber helps all companies. This is not self-serving. Fiber helps obviously broadband providers like myself, but it helps phone companies, it helps cable companies, it helps cellular companies, it helps YDOT. It provides services along our highways. It's a 40+ year technology that is still in use and will continue to be in use, and there's nothing else on the horizon that's better. Why I speak to that is, I believe fiber solves a problem that we talk about a little too often, and that is, what speed should we support? Fiber is capable of a gigabit symmetric. It's an investment now in our future, and you only have to invest in it once. And that's strange for me to say because a large portion of my network is wireless. I build both fiber and wireless. And when you hear me say that, I want you to understand the point I'm trying to make is, if we invest this smart and we look to our future and what we want to have in the future, we'll make that money go farther. And so I just want to point that out. My first suggestion and when I talked to Representative Summers about this meeting, when he placed the invite with me, the first suggestion is to include in legislation a limitation so that funds go to terrestrial. Federally, funds have gone to satellite, specifically at auction 903, which was referred to as CAF2, $122 million went out to satellite. Auction 904, $885 million went out to satellite. I want to point out that using the word terrestrial in legislation will result in Wyoming careers, Wyoming labor, rooms and meals, and placement of jobs within those communities that need those jobs right now. The other important thing I would point out is the interim final rule, and Ms. Zerga spoke to this, and she was very astute in recognizing this, requires eligible projects to deliver 100 megs down and 100 megs up. The addition to that I have is, it's where it's impractical, there is an opportunity to fund 100 megs down and 20 megs up. And I think the legislature has an opportunity, because here I am talking about speeds again, when I just said that fiber reduces the needs or eliminates the needs to talk about speed. But we know that to get the broadband needle moved in Wyoming, we need to place investment now. You can't justify fiber everywhere in Wyoming. It has to be a hybrid approach. But my point I'm making here is, and I want to zoom out here for a second, the legislature, and I think this is a continuance and an affirmation of what was said previously, the legislature is an opportunity to set the speed that future-proofs us and overcomes the digital divide. The phrase digital divide is interesting because it was coined 25 years ago and we're still talking about it today. So I would encourage the task force to make recommendations and include in language a speed designation that future-proofs us. My last thought is our state must take a stance on what broadband we want in the future. Relying on a federal definition is just not going to be sufficient. And if we are reliant on that federal definition, we'll be stuck to the remaining 200 census blocks in the state that have not been spoken for by satellite, that have not been addressed by providers like myself already. And that is not enough to actually receive funding to move the needle on broadband in Wyoming. So please set a minimum speed that mirrors Treasury rules and not what the FCC has written, and mirrors what Montana has already adopted at their legislature. And I stand for questions.
Any questions? No questions, I guess. Mr. Worthen, I guess you're not put on the spot, I guess.
I was prepared to be put on the spot, Mr. Chair.
Oh, here we go. Representative Duncan has a question.
Well, it's not a question, it's just a compliment. I really, for people who aren't familiar with your company, I just have to crush on you because you guys are just doing amazing things. These guys have brought fiber into Yoder, and they're in the process of bringing fiber into LaGrange. And so it's huge. It's coming into Torrington. It's in spots in Torrington, and it's coming in. I mean, it's a big deal. We've been a black hole for a long, long time, and so it just makes me weepy that we're talking fiber in LaGrange, Wyoming, Yoder, Wyoming. So we need to work on going north. You know, Lusk, that way. And if we could just have cell service, it would be great. So it's just a big deal. You guys have been amazing in our community, and just I'm meeting with your people later on. There's some stuff happening with some competitors, but we'll get it worked out. But you guys have been really committed to our state, and I really appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, Representative Duncan, I appreciate those comments.
Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Worthen, I appreciate you mentioning satellite, and I get a lot of colleagues that ask me about Starlink and why isn't Starlink just the panacea for all of our broadband needs? And I'm wondering if you could help explain to the committee why your preference for terrestrial. I would say that my preference is also for terrestrial, but I want to just give you the opportunity to speak on it if you would like.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Representative Yin, I did not focus, as you notice, on satellite and the technical answers to that, but I would answer your question, Representative, by saying satellite has not cured their latency problem and their jitter problem, and service goes in and out. And I can say that as a user of satellite at my house. I have it there and I test it on a half-hour basis. And so I'm very familiar with the product, and I would not be able to conduct this Zoom call successfully and rely on it enough to testify before you today using a satellite technology.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for being here. Ryan Fuller, looking at the agenda, maybe our next, do we have any public comments out there, Brian?
Mr. Chairman, we do have comment in person.
Okay, let's let them in.
Thank you, Chairman Furphy. Members of the committee, again, Jody Levin on behalf of Charter Communications. I want to offer some support for the comments that you've heard from my colleagues, both Ms. Zerga Mr. Worthen. I'd like to add to that, though, in terms of things that the task force has been asking, what is needed, what could be done to help broadband deployment. From Charter's perspective, lessons learned from other states, states that have a concrete process and deadlines are able to actually see these grant programs pushed out more quickly onto the ground. So they're seeing better success than Wyoming is. And so what does that mean in terms of a technical aspect? It means looking at an application process throughout the fall. I think that could coincide with a rulemaking process at the same time, but it means awarding projects early in the spring. The supply chain challenges that Ms. Sessions outlined are incredibly real. They're going to get worse too. Now that we see the ARPA funds, potential infrastructure plan, broadband is a top priority of this administration. And so the supply chain is going to be exacerbated. Construction is going to be exacerbated. Trying to find workers is going to be a challenge. So the more we can do now to advance a process and get awards made early in the spring, that allows you to get your equipment ordered, your contractors lined up so that you can take advantage of the construction season. Unfortunately, we are at a great disadvantage in comparison to a number of states because of our limited construction season. So anything that the task force can do, I don't know that this necessarily means legislation. Some of this, I think the Broadband Advisory Council and the governor's office could do through their own process, but putting those concrete measures in place so that all the carriers know this is when the application process opens up. This is the time frame when awards will be made. That helps you be able to make those your supply chain purchases and get your contractors lined up so that you're ready to go as soon as the weather cooperates in Wyoming. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Very good. Any questions? Senator Schuler.
Mr. Co-Chairman, just not really a question, I guess, but more of a comment. I think between Liz and Brian and Jody, they are, each one of them have given us great suggestions and given us some things that we need to take off and run with. Honestly, I am worried about our seasons and our ability to get construction workers and supplies and this, that, and whatever. And I think, Jody hit the nail on the head. We've got to have a process that's concrete and have deadlines that are out there sooner, and take advantage of the money and take advantage of what we can do. And so I do appreciate all three of the folks that have testified, because I think each one of them brought forth some really good suggestions for our committee. Thank you.
Very good. Barbara Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I just wanted to put an emphasis on what Ms. Levin stated. If we do not get grants awarded until February of next year with the supply chain issues, it will really be a 2023 build. There won't be much happening in 2022. I know we have already placed our 2022 orders for our construction material.
Good point. Further questions? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Group, do you want to take a 10-minute break before we get into the bill drafts? Nope. Yeah, okay. We'll take a 10-minute break, then let's come back at 20 till, if that works.
Chairman Furphy, just so you know, your mic is open.
Oh. Okay. I'm glad you told me. I didn't know it was on. We'll give the others another minute or two, and then we'll get started.
Mr. Chairman, I'd suggest we start.
Okay, let's go forward. So we've got the two bill drafts. Majority Floor Leader Summers, I think they're both your bills. Do you want to present them to us?
So, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I think I would ask Brian to explain, to go through the bill drafts. I'll just say a precursor to this. So coming into this meeting, one, we thought, well, we might have a special session. I wanted to make sure we got something out, something for the committee to look at. Too often you get in these first meetings and you just spin around and do nothing. So at least with the bill draft, we have something we can look at, talk about, see where we want to go. And really the first bill draft is basically a mirror, more or less, of Representative Newsom's bill that she passed, kind of tailored for the ARPA dollars that we have today. And the other one is kind of a catch-all grant program for some, I'm not giving up on the Wi-Fi router issue yet until you guys knock me down again. And then some telehealth stuff. So Brian, my suggestion, Mr. Chairman, is that Brian go through the bills.
That would be great. Ryan, are you prepared to do that?
You bet, Mr. Chairman. So I will start with 22 LSO 0026. You should have working draft 0.5, Connect Wyoming program funding and amendments. This bill draft builds off of, as was mentioned a minute ago, off of 2021 House Bill 197 and appropriates the ARP capital projects funds to the Connect Wyoming program that was started last year. And then this bill draft also specifies requirements for the projects that would be funded with ARP funds under this bill draft. So just starting on page 2, these are definitions. The first definition, the American Rescue Plan Act funds, is specifically limited to the funds that are dispersed to the state of Wyoming under section 604. So I know Ms. Zerga mentioned earlier some differences between the section 602 funding, which is the general state relief funds. This bill draft appropriates the section 604 capital projects funds. The definition for Connect Wyoming is similar to the definition that was in House Bill 197. Moving on to page 3, there are definitions for low latency, underserved area, and unserved area. And these definitions are based loosely on the definitions that were adopted in Montana legislation for the appropriation of their ARP funds for broadband projects. I would just note that this bill draft for underserved defines that to the threshold to be 100 megabits per second download and 10 megabits per second upload. Montana's underserved was 120, and then the same for unserved. Unserved in this bill draft is 25.3. Montana used as their threshold 25.10. And that's just the note in the staff comment at the end of page 3. At the top of page 4, the remainder of that staff comment, that's the definition that's currently used in the in the interim final rule for the Section 602 funds in terms of what unserved and underserved households or businesses are defined as. On page 4, line 9, this appropriates $100 million of the capital projects funds for broadband internet development projects as specified in this bill draft. The appropriation can't be used for any other purpose, and it would revert or deposited into the general fund unless otherwise provided by law, which in this case, federal law, I believe would provide that, how that would happen. On page 5, line 1, this just provides that if there are insufficient funds for that appropriation, this appropriation takes priority over any appropriation or reappropriation of these capital projects funds in any law enacted during the 2021 legislative general session. And Mr. Chairman, the reason that that subsection is in the bill draft is that in the 2021 session, these $109 million were appropriated both in the budget bill and in the capital construction bill for various projects involving school districts and community colleges. Page 5, line 8, just notes that projects funded through the Connect Wyoming using the appropriated funds in this bill draft must be in underserved or unserved areas in Wyoming. And then page 5, line 13, just some additional requirements. The funds cannot be expended except in accordance with state and federal laws, regulations, and orders. The governor would be required to adopt by rule provisions to ensure that adequate consideration is provided to the state for the expenditure of these public funds. And the governor may adopt rules, any rules necessary concerning the speed thresholds for underserved and unserved areas in order to comply with any federal requirements for the expenditure of these capital projects funds. And then at the end of page 5, going to the top of page 6, it just requires any recipients of the funds to comply with requirements that were included in 2021 Senate File 118. And these requirements, the reference to section 5D requires any recipient to report to the governor the amount of all grants provided for which the recipient is eligible for, has received, and has applied for. And then section 5E is a requirement for the governor to adopt rules regarding reporting requirements for recipients in order to comply with any federal reporting requirements. And then page 6, line 4, just provides that no new projects can be funded through Connect Wyoming with the appropriated funds in this bill draft after the later of December 31st, 2024, or any other deadline set in relevant federal law. The staff comment, Mr. Chairman, task force members, on page 6, the task force may wish to consider incorporating the language regarding the project speed requirements from the interim final rule. I think these were referenced earlier by both Ms. Zerga and Mr. Worthen. That just requires 100, 100, 100 for the speeds, or if impractical due to topography or geography that would lead to excessive cost, it can be 120, 100 download, 20 upload, but must be scalable to 100, 100. So that's the language in the staff comment on page 6 and into page 7. Page 7, section 2 is just rulemaking requirements for the governor in consultation with the business council, and then this bill draft would be effective immediately. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Summers.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll briefly go over. I used the 604 funds, when I wrote the bill. We can add in 602, I don't mind. The fact is those were appropriated, the 604 funds, but they were appropriated for what appears to be projects that cannot be funded now that we know what the guidance says for that. It was pretty clear the capital construction projects were going to have connectivity associated with them, and that was not known last session. And then the rest of it, I'm, like Ms. Zerga had an amendment. I'm entirely fine with that amendment. The dollar figure is I fit it to that 109 that was the capital construction, so 100 million, and then 9 million you'll see in the other bill if you choose to want to ask for more money, that's fine. We would have to add in that other pot of money. And I think we want to, keep this as a bill. And then if we want a recommendation to the governor on anything earlier than next session, then we make that just a simple recommendation. So that's kind of what it is and where it came from. So, Mr. Chairman, I guess I don't know if you would want to take any more public comment. I think there's been plenty, but if you want to, that would be appropriate now before we work the bill.
Brian, do we have anyone out there that's raising their hands? Not that I see.
Mr. Chairman, we do have comment in person here.
Okay, let's go ahead and take that, and then we'll go over.
This is Liz Zerga, representing Wyoming Telecom Association with respect to the amendments that I believe all of you received from me, Amendment 1, 2, 3, and 4. The only one that I would add to, I think Representative Summers covered 1, and I've talked about it before, why that's necessary. It's a timing issue. Amendment 2 is reflected in the Montana bill. Amendment 3, consider appropriating more dollars. I just wanted to give you just a little bit of a background with regard to what other states have done. And I don't know if you've seen that. So Montana has appropriated $275 million of their funding for their broadband pursuant to legislation that they've enacted. Vermont, $150 million. I believe Kentucky is $150 million. North Carolina was advancing a bill. I haven't followed it in the last few weeks. The Senate or perhaps the House, I can't recall, appropriated $750 million of their ARPA funding for broadband. So especially if you add in 602, I would ask that you look at the amount of appropriation and consider bumping that. I'm not going to suggest a number to you. You've heard what the need is. And then the last one is to insert that staff comment. So if you have any questions about any of these amendments, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Anyone have questions? Okay, very good. All right. Let's close public comments and let's go over the bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Amendments, Mr. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, I first have a question and then I'll make a motion on the bill. My question to Brian Fuller is, and it was raised by Brian Worthen, is the terrestrial issue. And I thought we had that in there, but then when I got to looking, I couldn't find terrestrial. So is terrestrial in the bill or not, to make that clear?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, there's no reference to terrestrial or any other sort of project limitation in that regard in terms of the type of technology.
Very good, thank you. And so, Mr. Chairman, I would like to move 22 LSO 0026.
Do we have a second? Senator Koss was the first, I think, to raise his hand. So we have a second. All right. Open it up for discussion.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think everybody has the draft amendments of Ms. Zerga's. I would like to move amendment number 1, amendment number 2, and amendment number 4. If I can get a second, I'll explain. Thanks.
Seconds, okay.
And Mr. Chairman, just quickly, amendment number 1 allows the use of 602 funds. I'm fine with that. I think that's a good idea. I left it out originally because I didn't want to get greedy, but we just as well get greedy. Amendment number 2 is pretty simple. That was probably bad on my part, not getting 20 instead of 10. And then I think that 6 and on page 6 and 7, I think putting in those speeds, the minimum speeds that have to be put in place as a result of a project, and it is the Treasury guidance. I think that's good. It's consistent with Treasury guidance. And then, Mr. Chairman, just the one thing I want to say about the speeds on, and so that's that. I'll just leave my comment there on those three amendments. Be one amendment, but those three that were brought to us.
Any questions on the amendments? All right, Brian, we're going to take a vote by show of hands. All those in favor of the amendment, please show your hand. That unanimously passes. Okay. Other amendments to the bill?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Cost.
I was going to say the amount Representative Summers didn't step in on the amount, which was the third part. And so I am willing to amend it to an amount, but I don't feel comfortable saying what that is right now. So I don't know where we go that would be the best. I've heard 300 million was the top end of where they could get things going, but that seems pretty aggressive. I don't know. So I'm going to say somebody that feels more comfortable can put a number in for that. Probably Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
you know, we're about the same population as Vermont. So I think they got a similar amount of ARP money that we did. And so, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we move that 100 million to 150 million.
Okay, Senator Cost, did you second that?
I did.
Okay. All right, discussion on the 150. All right, let's vote on amending it to 150. All those in favor, raise your hand. Yep, unanimous. Unless anyone, yeah, we all voted. Okay. So that passes. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make a comment first so everybody understands. And I think Ms. Zerga specified it really well. Even though there's a staff comment on page, I think it's on page 3, that the guidance, you know, talks about underserved and unserved being 25.3. I think the guidance also, as Ms. Zerga said, opens the door for the definition that we're going to have, which is underserved at 100/20. And so I think we're okay in this bill because, you know, on page, I'm just pointing this out to everybody so if they haven't grasped it, but on page 5, and I asked Brian to put this in there as kind of a catch-all, is the governor may adopt any rules necessary concerning speed thresholds for underserved and unserved in order to comply. I think it was certainly my intent, and I don't see any qualms here among the group that we want to have that underserved at that higher speed. If the guidance, somebody asks and the guidance, you know, the feds answer the question, no, that's not going to work, then that can be changed by the governor at a later point. So I think we're pretty good on that. The one motion I would make, and I'll make it conceptually, and I totally agree, and if that was a flub on my part, is I only want this to be eligible for terrestrial projects. So no satellite. As much as I like the idea of little satellites all over the world providing the internet, I'm just not sure that we need to pay for that. So that would be my motion, terrestrial for terrestrial projects.
Okay, we have a second from Barbara. Comments? Representative Yen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think generally the low latency definition will cover at least the definition for underserved and unserved areas for regards to satellite. However, I do think it's needed in B So I think it's a good idea, and I'm going to vote for it. So generally satellite will be higher latency. So our definition with requiring low latency theoretically would solve that, but I think it's better to be consistent and just add terrestrial to make sure that we're doing that correctly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go forward, Mr. Summer.
Mr. Chairman, I think ultimately when we put in terrestrial as well, and I think either Brian or Liz brought it up, it's going to mean Wyoming jobs, right? It's going to mean people digging ground in Wyoming, putting people to work. And I think ultimately that's some of what this is about as well, is to employ people. So, thank you.
Very good. Any other comments, questions? All right, we ready to vote? So all of those on the amendment, please raise your hand again. Once again, unanimous, so passes. Any other amendments? Brian, are you good with everything?
Mr. Chairman, I do have all the amendments down to make to the bill.
Okay, very good.
Question on the bill.
Okay. Once again, will everyone in favor of the bill, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Nope, passes unanimously. Great.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm not sure it matters on a task force whether you do a roll call on a bill draft. Since we can't sponsor a bill, I'm not sure it matters. Brian, what do we need to do to be street legal?
Oh, yeah, good point.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Summers, I think last year the task force did take roll call votes when it was sponsoring, or not sponsoring, but advancing these bills for consideration by a standing committee. That said, though, given that this is not a vote for sponsorship, I'm not sure a roll call vote is entirely necessary. I would defer to the two chairmen on how to proceed.
I missed that point, and I think we should do roll call. I think that makes sense. Sorry, I missed that.
Yep.
So Brian, if you're okay with that, let's go forward.
You bet, Mr. Chairman. So this is a vote for the task force to advance 22 LSO 26.5 with amendments. Senator Cost.
Aye.
Senator Schuler.
Aye.
Representative Duncan.
Aye.
Representative Yen.
Aye.
Ms. Hardesty.
Excused, she had to leave.
Ms. Sessions.
Aye.
Commissioner Shainfeld.
Aye.
Chairman Summers.
Aye.
Chairman Furphy.
Aye.
Motion carries, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, maybe I would work with you, the co-chair, and then we'll work with Brian at the end, later, and decide what committees we want to try to get this in front of, committee or committees. We'll have to look at the schedules.
Yeah, very good. All right, shall we move on to the next bill? Brian, you want to lead us through it?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So this is 22 LSO 54, Working Draft .3, Broadband and Telehealth Access Projects. This bill draft appropriates ARPA capital project funds for broadband and telehealth access projects and provides requirements that projects that use these funds must meet. So again, on page 2, definitions, the definition of American Rescue Plan Act funds is identical to what was in 22 LSO 26. So this only includes the capital projects funds, that 109 million, not the general state relief funds. The definition for broadband internet access project just means a project for which a local governmental entity establishes one or more public access points for wireless internet access in the within the local government entity or its boundaries. Healthcare provider, moving on to page 2, line 17, is just a definition for healthcare providers that would be covered by this bill. It includes it's any person or facility licensed, certified, or otherwise authorized to provide healthcare in the ordinary course of business. It includes nursing homes, that's on line 22, but does not include a person who provides healthcare solely through the sale or dispensing of drugs or medical devices. Then page 3, line 4, the definition of local governmental entity is any unit of local government or any branch, subdivision, or agency thereof, or any school district, community college district, or special district. Telehealth on page 3, line 9, for the returning members of the task force, this definition is based on one that was in one of the bill drafts that the task force considered last year. And is just a mode of delivery for healthcare services provided through telecommunication systems. Page 3, line 16, this is the requirement for the Business Council to establish a program for grants using the American Rescue Plan Act funds for local governmental entities to complete broadband internet access projects in Wyoming cities, towns, and counties. As part of this program, the council must provide grants to local governmental entities to enter into contracts not exceeding 5 years for wireless internet at these public access points. So as part of the program, up to 5-year leases basically would be included. Page 4, line 4, this is a requirement for the Department of Health to establish a program using the ARP funds for grants to healthcare providers for purchasing and using telehealth equipment to provide healthcare services to Wyoming residents. And then section 4 is the appropriations. So first is $8 million of the capital projects funds for the broadband internet access projects. And then moving on to page 5, that subsection B beginning on line 5 is an appropriation of $1 million of the capital projects funds for the grants for healthcare providers for telehealth equipment. Page 5, line 22, this is similar language from the previous bill that just notes that in the event of insufficient fund, these appropriations take precedence over those appropriations that were made in the capital construction bill and the 2021 supplemental budget bill. Page 6, line 6 just requires the expenditure of funds to comply with state and federal laws, regulations, and orders. And then any recipient must comply once again with those reporting requirements that are established in 2021 Senate File 118, and they're established by rule of the governor in accordance with Section 5E of that bill. Page 6, line 12 requires the governor in consultation with the Business Council and the Department of Health to promulgate all rules necessary for the provision of grants for the telehealth equipment and for broadband internet access projects as provided in the bill. It also must include rules as required under the language in 2021 Senate File 118 and rules to ensure that adequate consideration is provided to the state. Page 6, line 22 is just grants cannot be provided after the later of December 31st, 2024, or any other deadline that's set in federal law. And then, Mr. Chairman, this bill draft would be effective immediately. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I don't have any questions, but I'll just give a brief comment. So these are both issues we tackled last go around. We really didn't do anything. It might be in one of the recommendations we made to the governor's office. I can't remember. It seemed like there was something about Wi-Fi program. I chose this a little differently this time, back to communities to do it. And with the idea that you could also purchase 5 years of subscription. I don't know whether that's possible or what that would look like, but But that's the idea. I'm mostly good with Ms. Zerga's amendment. I would have a qualifier on Amendment 3, but I think in general, I support most of those concepts. And so the idea here obviously is, is there more need for telehealth out there? Put a little money out there in a grant program and see if there is. I know there are other grant programs, but that I think that question still remains. We have a couple options on this. One is we could move it to the next meeting. We can pass or defeat it at this meeting. It's kind of up to you all. And then the idea on the Wi-Fi connections in communities. I just think it's important that we try to get more, I know libraries to a degree have them. A lot of times counties pay for a library. I just think that more of those out there in the public are going to help people, going to help travelers that come through, are going to help a lot of different things. So that's the genesis of it.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chairman, that was my initial question. $1 million for telehealth to cover our entire state with all the healthcare providers didn't seem like very much money to me. And I think telehealth is a very big and important issue for our state. So that's just one of my thoughts, but if you want to go with $1 million initially, I think that's okay. Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if maybe we ought to just kind of hold off on this one till next meeting and make a decision then, because there's no big rush on this right now, is there? I think it's a good bill. I think maybe a little more talk, a little more clarification might be in order so that we feel comfortable going ahead with it. I'm okay either way if everybody decides to go ahead and vote on it, but I don't see the rush. So I was thinking maybe we could just kind of hold off on it, but that's my suggestion.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Yeah, I would agree with Senator Cost. Because I kind of think it might not be a bad idea to kind of take a look around and see what, maybe how much money we spent just during the pandemic on telehealth issues, or maybe take a look at what some other states are doing. Maybe we don't have enough in that pot. I don't know either. It's just with it not being, our backs not being against the wall necessarily on this one, I think it might be good to do a little research in the meantime before we meet again and kind of see what kind of funds we really are looking at. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I agree. We can just put it off. You can put off public comment till we hear it again, or you can take public comment now. But you probably ought to, one or the other. And I'm good. If anybody wants to make a motion to table to our next meeting, then that's pretty simple.
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I would move that we table this till next meeting so that we can do a little more research on it.
Senator Schuler, I guess that's a second. Yeah. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, once again, I'm fine with that. In fact, I like that because Ms. Hardesty's not here and she's kind of the telehealth person, and I would like her to be able to weigh in on whether it's a good thing, bad thing, needed, not needed. And so I think it's worth waiting till we get her input.
Well, okay. Yeah, I was kind of in favor of this bill going forward, but I can see where the consensus is. So, okay, we have a motion on the floor to table this to next meeting. Any other comments? All right. Representative Yin, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a quick question, because I haven't looked at our legislative calendar. When is our next meeting?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I visited with LSO this morning to try to get a date that that was before appropriations, and it appears that September 3rd would work. So we haven't officially set a date, but that's the date that seems to fit the legislative calendar with Mr. Fuller's commitments as well, and not crowding blockchain too hard.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure if we tabled the bill, we would have a meeting where we could actually hear it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to table to next meeting, which might be September 3rd, but okay, all of those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion on a recommendation. So, Mr. Chairman, I would make a recommendation to the governor that he consider spending leftover CARES Act or ARPA dollars for Connect Wyoming projects prior to the 2022 legislative session. Or at least authorize them. Let's put it that way, not spend, but authorize.
Okay, Representative Union seconds that. Comments?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't put a dollar figure in because I think the governor gets our drift, and then he can figure that out.
Right. Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to leave to get to another important meeting, but I am in favor of this. So if I could be recorded as a yes vote, I would appreciate it.
Okay, well, we'll vote right now as far as I can see, unless there's other comments. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, passes unanimously.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to make another motion on a recommendation. I would like to make a recommendation to the Joint Appropriations Committee to utilize ARPA dollars for cultural review of broadband projects in highway right-of-ways.
Okay, that's second by Representative Duncan. Right. Yeah, okay. Discussion? Representative Duncan? No. Okay, all in favor of that, please raise your hand. Unanimous vote again. Very good.
Mr. Chairman, I have one more recommendation to the Appropriations Committee, and well, maybe I'll make it to the governor's office for his recommendations on ARPA dollars. So I'm going to make it to the governor, which he would then make it to appropriations. But it is to recommendation to create a state navigator paid with ARPA dollars to help administer broadband grants. To aid the, basically to aid the broadband coordinator.
Do we have a second to that? Yeah, second by Lauren. Any other comments? Any comments on that?
Mr. Chairman, obviously, it's for the period of a budget. This would not be, this would be, one-time dollars for a 2-year period to get through our ARPA process. So, maybe I could make a conforming amendment. I think Brian Fuller would get the gist of that, if that's okay. With that, if would my second agree with that? Whoever my second was. Yeah, they're down there. Perfect.
All right, any other comments? Let's vote on that too. Everyone who's in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? No, unanimous again, Brian. Representative Summers, anything else?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to create a small subcommittee with your permission of maybe Representative Yin, Representative Schuler, and Ms. Sessions, and to take a look at a variety of the issues that were talked about today, including build once. And then perhaps this smaller group could come back if we have we have a chance to meet, or they have a chance to meet and see if there's any recommendations that they, after distilling today's meeting, that we might want to provide for, and they can bring their recommendations to us, the co-chairs, and then if we want to get a bill draft, we can. But I would like to see if those three would be willing to serve on a little subcommittee just to kind of look at, see if we missed anything. Would you all be willing to do that?
But you do mean Senator Schuler, right? Not Representative Schuler?
Well, we want her down there in the lower house, but
Well, you can't handle it, so you can leave her alone.
I'm afraid you do too. So, yes, Senator Schuler.
Yeah, very good. I don't think we need to vote on that as long as you guys are willing to do that. That's great.
And I think I'll put Rep Yin as, with your permission, I'll make him the chair of that. So that means he'll have to coordinate with Brian Fuller to get you guys on a Zoom call, and that way we can get you guys working on anything. All right, that's all I have. I'm out of wind.
Okay.
Good.
Brian, do you have anything further that we need to address?
Mr. Chairman, I do not.
Well, committee, good work today. We covered a lot of big areas, so.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman, is everybody good with September 3rd? Brian, does that still seem like it works?
I'll make it work.
Mr. Chairman, no, Chairman Summers, no issue on my end.
Okay, September 3rd it is, Mr. Chairman, if you're good with that, Mr. Co-Chair.
Yes, works for me. Okay.
Is it a Zoom?
It'll be
Yeah.
a Zoom.
Zoom, okay.
I'm good as far as I know. I have no idea with redistricting, so I'll
Right,
keep it. I'm at
Yeah.
the whim of the others, so
yes. Okay,
thank you.
I gotta
well, I
leave.
want to thank everybody for attending and providing comment and everything. I appreciate it.
Bye.